Great. Mark, first up then, geopolitical tensions, conflict in the Middle East. How is that affecting oil prices, do you think, and which regions of the world are going to be most impacted?
Well, geopolitics is a bit like predicting the weather. You do your best, but at the end of the day, the forces are out of any one person's control. I think when you think about the future of oil and gas, one needs to think, about the longer-term trends. And one of the things that we do know is that the climate crisis is impacting just about every region of the world, imposing huge costs on governments and basically on people's lives. And what we also know is that we can't continue to use fossil fuels at the rate that we're using them today and be able to manage the global climate. And so geopolitics in the near term certainly affect oil and gas pricing, but over the longer term there is a trend toward introducing alternative forms of energy into the global energy mix to address this longer and more sustained challenge that we all have.
And that energy transition, what can we expect in the short term? Do you think we hear a lot about it, but the picture seems to be getting worse?
Well, we're at a moment in time when you could either look at the glass half empty or half full. And what I mean by that is that, geopolitical insecurity is causing people to put priority on energy security and energy access and energy affordability. Those are, in fact, critical factors. But the reality is that climate change is imposing new and increasing costs on governments and on people. And that also needs to be part of the energy equation. I'm cautiously optimistic about the energy transition, in part because I see a whole host of new technologies coming into the marketplace. Over the last 10 or 15 years, the cost of wind, the cost of solar, the cost of batteries, the literal explosion of electric vehicles, in China and around the world are all indications that not only do we have an energy transition challenge, but we have technologies that are capable of meeting it. And I think that bodes well for a transition into the future.
And Brazil is considered a powerhouse, at least closer to home when it comes to renewable energy. Is that a fair assessment, and what does the rest of the world think of Brazil's efforts?
Well, Brazil has long benefited from a very substantial hydro resource, which has allowed the country to grow and develop its electric grid and do it in a way that's little to no CO2. Ironically, the climate crisis now endangers some of that hydro output because the rainfall is beginning to decrease and we're seeing incidences of tremendous drought. And so this is putting pressure on Brazil. Brazil has other opportunities, though, to make a real difference in the energy transition. Brazil, of course, is a major supplier of biofuels. And Brazil also is one of the countries that is in the vanguard of developing hydrogen. In both cases, biofuels and hydrogen will certainly can and should play a role in the energy transition. Green electricity can do a lot, but it can't do everything. We do need green molecules. I think Brazil is well positioned to be a supplier of those green molecules, but we need to pay very close attention to how that hydrogen is produced, how those biofuels are produced. Much of the climate benefit and the environmental benefit from these alternatives can be won or lost based on the methods of production.
And one of those that you touched upon was biofuel, biodiesel production in Brazil, still largely driven by food products as the raw materials. How does the world evaluate the use of those oil seeds and the associated cost with that agriculture as well?
Well, when we think about biofuels, we think about the need for alternative fuels for aviation. I'm pretty certain that there is no one that wants to get on an airplane knowing that their flight is costing someone access to food. And I'm also pretty sure that no one wants to get on an airplane and know that their flight is coming at the expense of sensitive ecosystems or endangered species. And so there is a challenge ahead of us to make sure that as we continue to develop the biofuels industry, that we're taking full account of how biofuels affect sensitive ecosystems, the rainforest and temperate grasslands, how the biofuels industry affects access to food and food supply, and that we strike the right balance to make sure that biofuels are making a positive contribution to addressing climate change, to transitioning away from oil and gas dependence without the negative consequences that are unfortunately very real and require us to be attentive to them.
We hear a lot about decarbonisation at events like this. What's the EDF's assessment of decarbonisation efforts in places like Europe, Asia and the Middle East currently?
Well, you know, I've been coming to the ADIPEC conference now for close to 5 years. And of course, at one time it was known as the world's largest oil and gas conference. More recently, the conference really has become the world's largest energy conference. And if you walk around the halls here, you see any number of companies that years ago were just focused on oil and gas production, now talking about a portfolio of energy technologies and solutions, biofuels, hydrogen, renewable electricity, and I see that trend continuing, in large measure because in many cases these alternatives actually are cheaper. When you talk about renewable electricity, wind and solar, it is cheaper than the fossil fuels alternatives today. When you talk about battery technology, you see that tremendous innovations that have been made in the last few years and how those improvements continue to lower the cost of energy storage. And so I think that that the future is bright for alternative energy, and the need is certainly great given what we're seeing in terms of increasing impact of climate change on all of our countries.
Let's finish by talking about transport if we can. The combustion engine vehicles, we're going to see the end of them soon?
Well, you know, today in China, which is one of the world's 3 largest car markets, the majority of new vehicles are electric. If you spend any amount of time in Europe, you also see electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles sort of dominate the streets there. That's one of the other world's largest electric vehicles markets. And then, you know, in the United States, where I'm from, you're also seeing electric vehicles begin to be a very common sight. But it's not just, you know, it's not just these global industrial powerhouses where electric vehicles are becoming prevalent. You see them even in many parts of the global south. And so different people have different perspectives on just how quickly electric vehicles penetrate the global auto market, but it's pretty clear that the trend is there. And as I said, the improvements in battery technology, the improvements in and lower costs associated with them, I think only argue for increased deployment of electric vehicles in the coming decades.
And just lastly, are you worried about the prohibitiveness of electric vehicles in the years to come, especially with the concerns around rare earths and critical minerals, battery storage, and the infrastructure as well? You need to be able to charge these. Is that going to be an issue holding back electric vehicle adoption in the developing world?
Well, access to green electricity is an important factor in how quickly we see the transition to electric vehicles. And yes, the construction of electric vehicle charging stations is another factor that will impact the pace of change. But I think the direction of travel is clear. It is in the direction of, you know, electrification of personal transportation. It is in the direction of electrification of buses and trucks, and that's, you know, accounts for more than half the energy value of a barrel of oil. So different people have different views of whether this is a transition that happens over 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, but the direction of travel, I think, is in fact quite clear.
Excellent, thank you, Mark. I'm just going to make sure that was